Hi all. We're going to look now at Ivanchuk versus Gurevich in round 11 of the 1991 Linares tournament. So Ivanchuk playing white played d4 and Gurevich played a King's Indian defence. And Ivanchuk chose here the Saemisch system, which is an early f3, named after the famous Friedrich Saemisch, who had a reputation actually of losing many games on time. Anyway, after castle's bishop e3, Gurevich now played e5, so he's immediately pressurising that d4 square. And Ivanchuk just played d5 now. So knight h5 was played, liberating this f pawn, so this is kind of thematic to go f5 and perhaps f4 later. White hasn't castled yet, and usually in this system might consider castling queenside, which is what occurred in the game. Queen d2 here, preparing to castle queenside. Often, white's also playing moves like h4 and g4 later and getting a kingside attack. This game's quite interesting because of what happened later, is that in this position, black closed the kingside with f4 a little bit, and after bishop f2, black now played bishop f6, with the idea of exchanging off this potentially bad dark square bishop with bishop h4 now. Ivanchuk didn't want this exchange and actually played here the move queen e1, stopping black from playing that bishop h4, and now bishop e7 was played. So the bishop's transfer from g7 to e7 has meant that the control of the c5 square has been reinforced, discouraging white from playing for c5. In this position now, Ivanchuk played g4, not minding if fg, hg, because that would actually be interesting for white. Let's have a quick look. So knight a6, now not g4 because of knight f4, that would be a nice position for black, with a nice outpost on that semi-open f-file. Instead here, I think that bishop e2 might get an advantage. For example, knight c5, knight h3, bishop d7, now f4, targeting that knight on h5. And in this position, I think white would have a slight edge. So anyway, black didn't play fg, instead knight g7. And after h4, knight d7 was played. So black has still great control of the c5 square, and is preparing to answer h5 with g5. So it seems the kingside's quite safe here. So Ivanchuk played knight g2, and after h6, it seems that black can't be attacked very easily on the king side. So instead Ivanchuk plays on the queen side, where he has a space advantage after all. And it's not uncommon to actually attack on the queen side in the Saemisch as well, as a sort of flexible strategy. After c5, Ivanchuk now played a3, perhaps with the later threat of b4. Now a6 was played. Now Ivanchuk reacted with knight c1. So his pieces are all kind of attacking the queen side indirectly, these bishops. And this pawn on c4 and the pawn on d5 give white a space advantage on that side. Knight e8 was played, and here bishop d3. So it's strengthening control a bit of the e4 square, but potentially the bishop can come back to c2. After b5, this represents a pawn gambit, which perhaps is a little unsound, and it ended up costing black the game. Easy to say in hindsight. Perhaps a slower idea of knight b6 it would be considered. For example, queen e2, bishop d7, and now black could play, for example, for b5 like this. A slow b5 without the pawn sack might have been more prudent in the game. So I think this kind of position might have been better than the game. Anyway, after b5, Ivanchuk has to face potentially a dangerous Benko-like gambit. So he's a pawn up. He closes now the king's side, which seems a bit controversial. It means all the action will be on the queen's side now, but he won't have any attacking counterplay on this side of the board if things go wrong here. Maybe in the ending though, as was shown, this pawn's going to be dangerous on h5. So we'll see now, Ivanchuk's a bit on the defensive on the queen's side. He's a pawn up, but black has potentially enormous pressure on the queen's side. It would be quite dangerous for most players to face this. After bishop a6, bishop takes, rook takes, black does seem to have good compensation. But we see now with this nifty move rook d3 that the b3 square is used by white to trade things down. And we'll see later this h1 rook being used in the same way. So we see now some simplification occurring. And with each simplification, white's task gets easier and easier. This rook c2 maneuver again goes to c3 later, the rook coming to c3. At one point now, after knight b6, queen e2, black played knight a4. White's very careful here to make sure no tactics are working against his king. And after knight a6, he plays the nifty queen a6. So here, if rook a7 had been played, then maybe queen b5, and after rook b7, then knight a5, and this c6 square will be very dangerous for black. So this was a very precise move, this queen a6. And after knight d7, it gives white a chance to play knight d2 with the nice c4 square being able to be used. So we see now a further exchange of bishops now, and white's task is getting easier. Still a pawn up on the queen side. And now coming in for the exchange of rooks via b3. So Ivanchuk's strategy basically is to consolidate this extra pawn up. And we see now these moves where white is preparing a very cunning blow now. After knight c4, knight c8, Ivanchuk plays a beautiful move here to exploit his pawn up. I'll give you 5 seconds to see if you can see it. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. He plays b4. And actually, after this move, Gurevich resigned. Let's see why. C takes b4, rook b3. And if b takes, then rook b7, king d8, now rook h7. And this seems to be a crushing position now for white, in all variations. For example, rook a4 would allow check and rook takes c8, with a fork if king takes it and knight b6. Let's also see knight a7, rook takes h6, knight b5 to try and get this pawn going, but just rook e6 here, because this check is harmless. The knight would have to go back to stop this rook takes d6. Just h6, and this h pawn is very dangerous, and white's easily winning this endgame now, just picking up this a3 pawn. So that was a very nice crushing blow at the end from Ivanchuk, who played a very consolatory game, just squashing black's counterplay. Let's go back for a quick overview and summary. A Saemisch variation, where black blocked up the king side. White later focused attention on the queen side, and just slowly consolidated his extra pawn, just using the b3 square for the rook exchanges. And then later, after this other rook was exchanged in this position, white had a big advantage. So here the final blow in the game was b4. I hope you enjoyed that game. Leave any comments on YouTube, and see you later. Thanks very much.